And the exit polls are out. The seventh and final phase of voting in Uttar Pradesh concluded on Monday, and with this, the assembly elections in the 5 states as the voting ended, winding up the mammoth assembly elections. Here are the exit poll predictions. The BJP is likely to win Uttar Pradesh and the Aam Aadmi Party may bag most seats in Punjab. A poll of exit polls has indicated after the end of voting in 5 states. It's predicted a hung house in both Goa and Uttarakhand, and the BJP emerging as the largest party in Manipur. Remember, exit polls do not always get it right. The final results will be revealed only on the 10th of March when the counting of votes take place. But let's delve into each of these states separately. First, Punjab. Exit polls on Monday predict a clear victory for the Aam Aadmi Party or AAP in Punjab, with the scale of the party's victory varying across various surveys. But it predicts that Arvind Kejriwal's led AAP, which is in power in Delhi, will get a landslide victory in this state. Surveys also predict that the ruling Congress will finish a distant second in the state, followed by the Shiromani Akali Dal, which had allied with the BSP. Now, if AAP comes to power in Punjab, it will be a massive change, as Mr. Kejriwal's party will run a full state, unlike Delhi. For the first time, Delhi, of course, is a union territory. Now let's go across to Goa. A poll of exit polls indicates that both the BJP and the Congress will end up with 16 seats in Goa each, leading the state for another hung assembly. Goa has a 40-member house, and Goa might be heading for another hung assembly, much like that cliffhanger of 2017. An aggregate of 9 exit polls have predicted. Data indicates that both the BJP and the Congress will end up with 16 seats in this 40-member house, and then the kingmaker would be Mamata Banerjee's Trinamool Congress, which is contesting in the coastal state for the first time in an attempt to build up a pan-India image. For Uttarakhand, a poll of polls has predicted a close contest between the BJP and the Congress with 34 and 32 seats respectively. Uttarakhand has 70 seats. A poll of exit polls has indicated a hung house with no party crossing the required majority of 36 seats. An average of 10 available exit polls shows a close contest between the BJP and the Congress, with the BJP at a slight edge, but both parties within reach of a majority. In Manipur, the BJP is set to emerge as the largest party with 30 seats. That's what the poll of exit polls predicts. Manipur voted in 2 phases on the 27th of February and the 3rd of March as the elections were held for the 60-member state assembly. All right, and of course, the big story of all these states. Uttar Pradesh, an aggregate of 10 exit polls have predicted a second term for the BJP in Uttar Pradesh, India's largest state, seen as the gateway to power at the centre. The BJP, the aggregate indicates, may win 240 plus of the state's 403 assembly seats. Akhilesh Yadav Samajwadi Party, seen as the big challenger to the BJP, may win 130 plus seats. Mayawati's BSP may win 10 plus, and the Congress at the bottom of the tally with 4 seats.
So today, on the 7th of March, our 1-month journey on the road is coming to an end. Well, it's not over quite just yet, because we are supposed to cover the counting as well in Lucknow, but 7,500 kilometers done. We started from Greater Noida and moved eastwards, and we have reached Varanasi. And this journey would not have been possible. The journalism of this journey would not have been possible without this team. We'll start with Mr. Harpal Singh, who has been our driver in more ways than one. Thank you, Harpal ji. You've been a real inspiration and a pillar to make sure that we reach every location in time. He is not fast and furious, but clever on the road. Sachin Gupta, very religious man, as you can see, strongly battled his upset tummy in the initial days of this coverage, but he managed to trudge along. Thank you very much, Sachin. Some remarkable picture stories told by this man right here. And the pillar, the editorial pillar of the show called Election Radar, Osama Shah, who's battling an upset tummy now at the fag end of this journey. But he's doing fine and he's breathing normally. Thank you very much to all of you. We could not have brought remarkable stories without the love and appreciation that we got from the viewers. But after having covered elections and politics for the past 2 decades, I can say that this still was an amazing learning experience. You always learn something new. when you are on the road, and especially when there is an election radar. Here is a sample of the work that was done over the past 1 month by this remarkable team of journalists. लखीमपुर, कुनिया, अमेठी, शाहजहांपुर, मुजफ्फरनगर, करहल, कानपुर, वाराणसी, गोरखपुर, लखनऊ। बैटल ऑफ द रोड शोज हो रही है, हर तरफ रोड शो। एक तरफ रोड शो प्रियंका और राहुल गांधी का, दूसरी तरफ रोड शो अखिलेश यादव का, और अब एक रोड शो प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी का। The big question is, who can convert road shows into votes?
इकोनॉमी एक बड़ा मुद्दा है.
Petty politics of caste.
The government will of course upgrade.
Who wins Uttar Pradesh?
And the big international story of the day. Today is day 12 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke to both President Putin and the Ukrainian President Zelensky and stressed on the safe evacuation of Indians from Ukraine's Sumy. The phone call with President Putin lasted about 50 minutes and a 35-minute call took place with President Zelensky. And Ukrainian officials arrived in Belarus. Let's move on to the other story. Ukrainian officials arrived in Belarus for a third round of talks with Russian officials as Russia's invasion of Ukraine entered its 12th day. The talks aimed at resolving the ongoing conflict are being held close to the Polish-Belarusian border north of Brest. Belarus is a key ally of the Russian President Vladimir Putin and served as a launching ground for some of the invasion forces. Monday's talks come hours after Russia announced that it would be observing a ceasefire and establishing humanitarian corridors for civilians in some Ukrainian cities. It is, however, not immediately clear as to what extent the ceasefire is being observed or whether evacuations were taking place. Last week, both sides agreed to open humanitarian corridors to allow civilians out of some combat zones, but none of them has worked so far, with both sides accusing the other of violating local ceasefire.
It's a crucial day today in the Ukraine with the peace process now on. Once again, there are talks which are taking place between the Russian side and the Ukrainian side. Will this finally result in a real peace? Because the worry now is that if it doesn't, then the prospect of real bombardment of Ukrainian cities is once again likely to emerge as a big international concern, and certainly a concern for people in this country. This on a day in which Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spoken to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's also spoken to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. In his conversation with Zelensky, that lasted about 35 minutes, he's thanked the Ukrainian President for all the assistance given to Indian students. And in his message to President Vladimir Putin, he said that there needs to be a face-to-face conversation which actually takes place between him and Zelensky. Now, whether that's at all going to take place, whether that's going to take place anytime soon, nobody really knows. Meanwhile, the crisis over here in Ukraine, with people actually moving away from the east of the country to the west to try and get across to Poland or to other areas which they believe is safer, is something which continues to be a reality. More than 1.5 million Ukrainians have left this country. The humanitarian tragedy continues.
And of course, the fallout of this is being felt across the world. And back home, the rupee has hit a fresh lifetime low of 77 rupees to the dollar as a surge in crude oil above $130 threatens to push up imported inflation and widen trade deficits driven by intensifying geopolitical risks due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Forex traders said escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine have kept crude oil prices elevated and heightened worries about domestic inflation and broader trade deficits, and the impact again being felt home. The Nifty and the Sensex declined over 2%. The Sensex plunged 1,491 points. The Nifty falling 382 points. The rupee, like I said, hitting that low of 77 rupees to the dollar. The U.S. markets overall fell by over 1.5 points. And of course, the surge in oil rates is likely to increase India's oil import bill. Remember, India imports nearly 80% of our fuel. So our fuel needs, 80% of them are imported. So the rupee, already one of the worst performing currencies among emerging markets, likely to take a hit further. And so of course this means that a fuel price will then be imminent. Amid worries of crude oil price hikes, Punjab farmers are now stocking up on fuel. Russia and Ukraine are the key global suppliers of crude oil, with buyers in Asia and the Middle East. Russia is the third largest oil producer and the second largest oil exporter in the world. Diesel consumption by farmers increases significantly during the harvest season, which usually starts in the second week of April in Punjab. And so we're seeing some panic buying by farmers in the state.
Many parts of Punjab and Haryana, for the last couple of weeks, we have seen that farmers have been queuing up at fuel stations. They fear that due to Ukraine-Russia crisis and rising price of crude oil in the international market, maybe the government of India here will also sort of increase the prices of fuel.
कई जगह लोग जो हैं ज़्यादा तेल खरीद रहे हैं, चुनाव का आज आखिरी चरण है, कैसे देखते हैं आप इसको?
पर ये जो पेट्रोल वगैरह महंगा हो रहा है, ये है प्रॉब्लम तो है।
इलेक्शंस की वजह से हो रहा है या यूक्रेन रशिया की वजह से हो रहा है, इसको कैसे?
दोनों ही चीज़ें आ रही है इसमें तो।
इलेक्शन की वजह से भी हो सकता है और ये पीछे कच्चा तेल महंगा आ रहा है बोल रहे हैं, इस कारण भी हो सकता है।
Well, there is panic buying at many petrol stations across Chennai following speculation that the price of petrol could go up by 12 to 22 rupees a litre now that all elections are over and the final phase of elections are underway. Ms. Shivram, thank you very much. What made you go for filling up your tank?
Yeah, actually I heard the news that the price of the petrol is going up. So actually I was running out of petrol, so I came up to fill up the tank.
I heard that it's going to be increased by 15 to 20 rupees, but I'm not sure. It's all it's how it's going to happen. Because, till the election time it was slowly, it's calm. So nobody was disturbing the public. And now at present I think the elections are all over now. I think the government will do whatever he wants. Then if the petrol increases, then everything will be increasing. Transportation, everything, it will be a big hassle for public.
And let's go across to my colleague Himanshu, who's monitoring this story. Himanshu, I think this is what possibly is concerning people the most. Are we expecting, especially because of the elections, there were no increases in petrol prices, but those elections also over? Does this mean a price hike, fuel prices is imminent?
That's right, and that is what the senior oil industry official has told me. He said that it has been 123 days since we last revised the price of petrol and diesel in India. And in this period, from 4th November 2021 till 7th March 2022, the price of crude oil, the Brent crude especially, has risen by more than 60% from $80 odd to $130 odd, which was the price at one time today. And this is the pressure that oil companies are now facing. Rupee, as we know, has fallen to its lowest ever level today. That essentially means that India's import bill is going to go up significantly. First, because of the rise in crude oil prices, and second, the weakening of the rupee. So clearly, the pressure is rising. We have been told by sources that at least 12 rupees per litre increase in petrol and diesel is very, very necessary for oil companies to keep their finances intact and ensure that not much burden is also passed on to the Aam Aadmi. But at the same time, oil industry sources are also saying that it depends on what the government will do now. Government has two options. One, to release additional stock of crude oil from its strategic petroleum reserves. And second, reduce the excise and VAT duties on petrol and diesel. So if the government takes any of these two decisions, then the burden that will be passed on to the Aam Aadmi, the price rise, of course necessitated by the Ukraine crisis, will be much less for the common people.
Harjot Singh, who was shot in Kiev, arrived in Delhi on an Indian Air Force flight. He is now recovering from his wounds at the Army Hospital.
We are currently at the Hindan Air Base in Ghaziabad, where the flight from Poland has just reached. This is the C-17 aircraft of the Indian Air Force being brought back from Rzeszów in Poland. On this flight is 31-year-old Harjot Singh, the student who had received bullet injuries in the Ukrainian capital city of Kyiv when he was trying to escape that war zone. However, he was caught in the crossfire, woke up in a hospital and had pleaded to the Indian government to rescue him. His family back here in Delhi's Chhatarpur had also appealed to the government to somehow save him. Finally, on this last flight that was coming from Poland, on which Union Minister VK Singh was also a passenger, and 200 other Indian students were also on board. Harjot's ambulance was brought to the airport in Rzeszów, Poland, from where he was taken on a stretcher and inside this flight. But finally, as you can see, he's been taken in the ambulance. The ambulance is now leaving from there after carrying Harjot inside. So he will be taken to a hospital where he can be given proper care. We had earlier seen videos of when his ambulance had been brought to the Rzeszów airport in Poland. Mr. VK Singh was seen in videos speaking to Harjot. He was in a position to speak and interact, and those videos were later posted by the Union Minister, saying that he will hope for a speedy recovery for Harjot. This ambulance, as you can see, making its way on the sides of the airbase, as you can see, probably looking for an exit now to the hospital where Harjot will be taken for further treatment. This is the last flight from Poland, from where about 3,000 students have been rescued via evacuation flights in the last 7 days. Finally, that operation is now over, with even students like Harjot Singh being rescued. From the Hindan Air Base in Ghaziabad, with camera person Ashwini Mehra, this is Sukirti Dwivedi for NDTV.
And finally, with growing concerns of civilian casualties in Ukraine and Russia continuing to bomb targets, the Ukrainian president has reiterated his demand for a no-fly zone over his country. President Zelensky says that his country will never forgive the shooting of unarmed people.
Ми не пробачимо розстріли беззбройних людей, руйнацію нашої інфраструктури. Ми не пробачимо сотні жертв, тисячі і тисячі страждань. І Бог не пробачить ні сьогодні, ні завтра, ніколи.
As civilian casualties grow, a desperate call from the Ukrainian president to enforce a no-fly zone over his country.
Ми не пробачимо.
Volodymyr Zelensky also restated his request for jets for Ukraine's military if Western leaders continue to rule out a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Zelensky said 8 Russian missiles hit the city of Vinnytsia, southwest of Kyiv, completely destroying the airport.
Ми повторюємо кожного дня: закрийте небо над Україною, закрийте для всіх російських ракет, для російської бойової авіації, для всіх цих терористів. Зробіть гуманітарну повітряну зону, без ракет, без авіабомб. Ми люди, і це ваш гуманітарний обов'язок захищати нас, захищати людей. І ви це можете.
Ukrainian officials say a second attempt to evacuate civilians from a city in southern Ukraine failed as Russian attacks stopped efforts to create a humanitarian corridor. This despite announcing a ceasefire in Kiev, Kharkiv, Mariupol and Sumy on Monday. In the port city of Mariupol, where Russian and Ukrainian forces had agreed to an 11-hour ceasefire to allow civilians and the wounded to be evacuated, Russian attacks quickly closed the corridor. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry continued striking targets in Ukraine. This footage released by the Russian Defense Ministry says these are tank columns in the Kyiv region and fighter jets over Ukraine. Russia described it as intercept missions and striking nationalist military infrastructure targets with high-precision weapons. Meanwhile, citizens living in Serbia gathered in central Belgrade in support of Ukraine. A Russian citizen set his Russian passport on fire to show his opposition to the invasion of Ukraine.
После Крыма я живу здесь. И я не хочу отвечать, я не хочу краснеть, я не хочу быть гражданином этой страны.
An 11-year-old boy is being hailed as a hero after he traveled 1,000 kilometers by train to Slovakia, where he has his family. The boy's mother sent him off alone because she could not leave her mother behind. All the boy had with him was a plastic bag, his passport, and a phone number written on his hand. An NDTV Bureau report.